After 3 or 4 months in the saddle, a Texas cowboy's idea of heaven wasn't whiskey or a card table. It was a hot plate of food he hadn't cooked himself over a buffalo chip fire. By the time the herd staggered into Abilene or Dodge City, those men had eaten beans, salt pork, and sourdough biscuits until the very sight of them turned the stomach. So they spent their wages on the one thing the trail could never give them, a real cooked dinner. Number 14 on this list made grown men go quiet at the table, and number 3 was so prized a drover would hand over a full day's pay for a single slice. These are the 30 boarding house and eating house dinners that Cattletown cooks set before trail-weary cowboys. Let's count them down, starting with number 30. Number 30, boiled cabbage and bacon. After weeks of grease and gristle, a plate of plain boiled cabbage seemed like a banquet to a trail hand. Boarding house women in Newton and Wichita kept a pot going on the back of the stove, simmering a slab of side bacon with a head of cabbage and a few peeled potatoes until the whole kitchen smelled of pork and steam. For 2 bits, a cowboy got a heaping plate, the cabbage soft and silky, the bacon salty enough to remind him of the trail, but cooked with a gentleness no chuckwagon ever managed. More than one drover admitted he ate his greens first, like a boy minding his manners again. Number 29, hominy and hog jowl. Big white kernels of hominy, swelled soft and slippery in a pot with a chunk of smoked jowl, carried the taste of the old southern kitchens most of these men had ridden away from. Landladies in the Kansas cattle towns served it cheap, ladled steaming beside the meat, the corn gone tender, and the pork rich enough to slick the lips. To a Texas boy who had grown up on it, that bowl was pure homesickness made edible. He would salt it heavy, mash the jowl into the kernels, and mop the plate with cornbread. It cost almost nothing, fed a working man to the brim, and for the few minutes it took to eat, the long, dusty miles between him and his mother's stove seemed to close right up. Number 28, corn dodgers and cornbread. On the trail, bread meant a hard sourdough biscuit or a flapjack scorched on one side. So a wedge of proper cornbread, golden and crumbling, baked in a hot iron skillet until the edges turned lacy and brown, was a small miracle. Boarding house cooks turned them out by the dozen, some as flat-fried dodgers, some as thick squares split and slathered with butter. The smell of cornmeal browning in bacon grease pulled men in off the dusty street. A cowboy would crumble a piece into his bowl of beans or sop it through pot liquor, marveling that anything so simple could taste so good. It was the bread of childhood, and after months of trail biscuit, it tasted very fine indeed. Number 27, stewed dried prunes. Fruit on the trail meant a handful of withered dried apples if the cook felt generous. So when a boarding house set down a dish of dark stewed prunes, plumped soft in their own sweet syrup, men ate them like candy. The prunes came west in wooden boxes by the rail car, cheap and keeping forever, and a good cook simmered them slow with a little sugar until the liquor turned thick as molasses. Drovers spooned them up at breakfast or after supper, sometimes over a slab of bread, savoring a sweetness their bodies had been quietly starving for. Doctors of the day swore by them for men whose insides had gone sluggish on 3 months of beef and biscuit, and the cowboys, whatever the reason, never turned them down. Number 26, sorghum molasses on hot biscuits. The chuckwagon cook kept a supply called lick, sorghum syrup, but it was rationed thin and often gone before Kansas. In town, a boarding house breakfast came with a pitcher of dark sorghum and a plate of biscuits straight from the oven, light and steaming, nothing like the leaden trail variety. A cowboy split his biscuit, watched the molasses sink in dark and slow, and ate one after another until the landlady raised an eyebrow. The syrup was thick, faintly bitter, deeply sweet, and it cost the house only pennies a meal. For men who had tasted nothing sweeter than coffee sugar for weeks, that pitcher of sorghum was reason enough to come back to the same table every morning of their stay. Number 25, cold buttermilk. It sounds like nothing, but a tall glass of cold buttermilk could stop a trail-worn cowboy in his tracks. On the drive, there was no milk at all, only black coffee and creek water gone warm in the canteen. A boarding house with a milk cow and a spring house could pour buttermilk cool and tangy, flecked with little curds of butter, and men paid gladly for the privilege. They drank it down in long pulls, wiped the foam from their mustaches, and asked for another. Some swore it settled a stomach ruined by greasy trail fare. Others just loved the clean, sour bite of it after months of dust. Whatever the reason, that humble glass was one of the first comforts a man chased the moment his boots hit a real town. Number 24, fried donuts. The Cowboys called them bear sign, and a wagon cook who could make them was treasured above gold. But most couldn't, so donuts meant town. A boarding house with a kettle of hot lard turned out rings of fried dough, crisp and brown outside, soft and cakey within, rolled in sugar while still warm. The smell alone could empty a saloon. Men who hadn't tasted anything fried and sweet in 100 days ate them by the half dozen, fingers slick with grease and sugar, grinning like children at a fair. A good landlady knew exactly what she had, and bear sign tonight passed up and down the street faster than any newspaper. Few things in a cattle town drew a hungrier crowd than a fresh batch of fried donuts. Number 23, soda crackers and rat cheese. Not every craving was for a hot meal. Sometimes a trail hand wanted only a wedge of sharp yellow cheese, called rat cheese, the rough store-cut kind, and a fistful of soda crackers, eaten standing up at the boarding house counter. It was the taste of the general store, of civilization, of a place where a man could simply buy food instead of cooking it from a sack of flour. The crackers were dry and salty, the cheese pungent and crumbling, and when washed down with cold buttermilk, it made a quick, satisfying supper for a few cents. Old drovers remembered it fondly, that simple plate, because it asked nothing of them but to sit and eat like an ordinary man among ordinary men. Number 22, baked sweet potatoes. Split open with a knife, steam curling up from the orange flesh. A baked sweet potato slathered in butter was pure comfort to a cowboy weeks from any garden. Boarding house cooks banked them in the oven until the skins blistered and the insides went soft as custard, sweet enough to need no sugar. The men of the cattle drives, many raised in the South, knew that taste in their bones. They ate them beside their meat, or all on their own, mashing the butter through, sometimes adding a drizzle of that sorghum syrup. After the relentless starch of trail biscuits, the natural sweetness felt almost like dessert. Cheap, filling, and faintly of home, the humble sweet potato earned its place on every Cattletown supper table. Number 21, liver and onions. Fresh Oregon meat spoiled fast and rarely survived a trail drive, so liver and onions became a town treat rather than a chore. Boarding house women fried thin slices of beef liver quickly in a hot skillet, smothered them in soft brown onions, and laid them over mashed potatoes with a ladle of pan gravy. The smell was strong, the iron-rich flavor stronger, and the men ate it with relish, their bodies craving exactly what it offered after months of hard riding. It cost the house little, since liver was the cheap end of the butcher's block, but it filled a plate handsomely. A cowboy might wrinkle his nose at the smell drifting from the kitchen, then clean his plate twice over. Number 20, wilted greens and salt pork. When the weather turned and the gardens came in, a boarding house could set down a mess of greens, turnip tops, dandelion, whatever grew, wilted soft in the fat of fried salt pork and splashed with vinegar. After a season eating dried and canned everything, a cowboy's body fairly ached for something green and fresh, and he felt it the moment that plate arrived. The greens were faintly bitter, the vinegar sharp, the pork salty and rich, and a wedge of cornbread mopped up the pot liquor at the bottom. It was poor folks' food, valued more for what it did than how it looked, An old trail hand spoke of that first plate of real greens as a kind of cure. Number 19, sausage and milk gravy, fresh pork sausage, fried in patties until brown and crackling, then drowned in pale milk gravy, peppered black. There was a town breakfast worth riding hard for. The cook browned the sausage, stirred flour into the drippings, poured in milk, and worked it until smooth and thick to pour over split biscuits. Steam rose off the plate. The gravy clung. The sausage gave up its sage and pepper with every bite. A trail hand who had eaten salt pork until he could not stand it found in that sausage a richer, livelier cousin. And the creamy gravy was a luxury the drive could never offer for lack of milk. Many a cowboy named that plate the finest breakfast money could buy in any cattle town in Kansas. Number 18, chicken and dumplings. A laying hen was too valuable to kill on the trail and impossible to keep, so chicken meant town, and chicken and dumplings meant a Sunday worth remembering. The boardinghouse cook stewed a whole bird slow until the meat slid from the bone, then dropped soft dumplings of flour and lard into the bubbling broth to swell and steam under the lid. What came to the table was a deep bowl of tender chicken, pillowy dumplings, and rich golden broth thick enough to coat a spoon. Cowboys ate it in reverent silence, the way men eat food that tastes like a mother's kitchen. It was the dish that turned a hard-bitten drover quiet, made him think of home, and brought him back to the same table the following Sunday. Number 17, boiled beef and horseradish. They had beef on the trail every single day, but trail beef was roasted on a stick or boiled tough in a pot with little more than salt. A boardinghouse boiled brisket, slow with onions and carrots until it carved soft, then served it with a dish of sharp horseradish that cleared a man's head clean. That bite of horseradish was the revelation. It cut the richness and woke up the meat in a way the chuckwagon never dreamed. Suddenly, beef tasted new again. Men who thought they could not stomach another mouthful of cow found themselves going back for thirds, the tender slices laid over potatoes and crowned with that fiery white sauce. It was beef made strange and wonderful, and the cowboys could not get enough. Number 16, bread pudding. Nothing went to waste in a boardinghouse kitchen, and stale bread became the foundation of one of the great cattle town comforts. Torn crusts soaked in eggs, milk, and sugar, studded with raisins and dusted with nutmeg, baked until the top went golden and the middle stayed soft and custardy. That was bread pudding, served warm with a spoon of sweet sauce. For a cowboy whose only sweets in months had been a stolen lump of trail sugar, the first warm spoonful was almost too much. The smell of nutmeg and baked custard filled the dining room, and men lingered over their bowls, scraping the dish clean. It cost the house only its leftovers, yet gave back a comfort no money could rightly buy. Number 15, rice pudding. Creamy, gentle, and faintly sweet, rice pudding was the dessert that asked nothing of a man but to sit and be soothed. The cook simmered rice slow in milk and sugar, stirred in eggs and a handful of raisins, then baked it until a golden skin formed across the top. Cowboys who had spent a season chewing leathery trail fare found something almost tender about it, a softness their mouths had forgotten. They cracked through that caramelized skin into the warm pudding beneath, sometimes arguing good-naturedly over who got the best of the top layer. Cheap to make and easy to keep, it appeared on cattle-town tables week after week, a small, reliable sweetness that reminded hard men they were, for a little while, being looked after. Number 14, hot light bread and fresh butter. This is the one that made grown men go quiet. On the trail, there was no such thing as soft white yeast bread, only dense sourdough biscuit or fried dough gone hard by noon. So when a boarding house set down a loaf of light bread, fresh from the oven, the crust crackling and the crumb white and tender as a cloud, with a dish of cool, fresh-churned butter beside it, something in a man let go. He would tear off a piece, watch the butter melt golden, into the warm bread and eat it slow, with his eyes half closed. Old drovers swore there were cowboys who wept over that first slice, not from sorrow, but from the plain shock of comfort. After months of hardtack, soft bread was a tenderness the body remembered. Number 13, chow chow and pickles. Months of bland, fatty trail food left men hungry for something sharp, bright, and sour, and a boarding house crock of chow chow answered the call. That tangy relish of chopped cabbage, green tomato, onion, and pepper, put up in vinegar and spice the autumn before, woke up a plate of meat and beans like nothing else. Alongside it sat jars of pickled cucumbers and pickled beets, glistening and tart. Cowboys heaped the relish onto everything, chasing that vinegar bite their bodies craved after a season of grief. It cost the landlady only the labor of a fall afternoon, yet it transformed every supper she served. Drovers remembered those pickles vividly, the way a single spoonful could make plain food taste alive again. Number 12, gingerbread. Dark, spicy, and moist, a square of warm gingerbread carried more flavor than anything the trail could offer in 100 miles. The boarding house cook stirred molasses and ginger and cinnamon into the batter, baked it in a sheet, and cut it into generous slabs, served plain or under a spoon of whipped cream when the cow was milking well. The smell of ginger and molasses filled the dining room and drifted out into the street, and cowboys followed it like hounds. That deep, dark sweetness, warm with spice, hit a man who had tasted nothing but coffee and beans like a holiday all its own. Cheap, filling, and keeping for days, gingerbread was the cattle town's everyday cake, and the trail hands could never seem to get enough of it. Number 11, canned peaches. A bright tin of peaches in heavy syrup was one of the great luxuries of the cattle towns, the same fruit men had dreamed about during long dry days on the drive. The boarding house opened the can and spooned the golden halves into a dish, syrup and all, and a cowboy ate them slow, savoring each cool, sweet, slippery bite. After months of dust and salt and grease, that sugary syrup tasted like pure sunshine. Some men spooned the peaches over a slice of cake or a bowl of pudding, but most just ate them straight, tipping the dish to drink the last of the syrup. The fruit came west by the rail car in those gleaming tins, and few things made a hard-used drover feel quite so rich. Number 10, hot cakes with sorghum syrup. A short stack of hot cakes, golden and steaming, drowned in dark sorghum and crowned with a melting pat of butter, was the breakfast that started a cowboy's town day right. The chuckwagon flapjack was a sorry, scorched thing, eaten standing up in the cold dark. The boarding house version was tender and even, 3 or 4 to a plate, cooked on a greased griddle until the edges laced brown. A man cut through the whole stack at once, let the syrup soak down through every layer, and ate until his belt complained. The cook kept the griddle hissing and the coffee coming, and the dining room filled with the smell of frying batter, for pure morning comfort. After the trail, few plates ranked higher. Number 9, pork chops with fried apples. Thick-cut pork chops, fried brown in a hot skillet and served beside a heap of apples cooked soft and sweet in the drippings. That was a supper to make a trail and forget every hard mile behind him. Pork was a rare thing on a beef drive, and a proper chop, juicy and crusted, tasted like a different world after 100 days of cow. The fried apples, gone golden and caramelized and faintly tart, cut the richness just right. Boarding house cooks in the cattle towns knew the pairing well and charged a little extra for it. And the cowboys paid without blinking. A man would eat his chop down to the bone, then mop the sweet apple syrup with bread, satisfied to his soul. Number 8, roast beef and brown gravy. It seems a strange thing to crave more beef, but a true roast, cooked in an oven, carved in thick pink slices, and laid under a ladle of rich brown gravy, bore no resemblance to the trail-boiled meat the men knew. The boarding house roast came with mashed potatoes, the gravy made from the very drippings of the pan, dark and savory and clinging. After a season of beef cooked hard over an open fire, that tender, juicy roast was a revelation in what their own staple food could become in the right hands. Cowboys ate it Sunday style, plates piled high, gravy over everything, and understood for the first time that beef had been a luxury all along. They had simply never had it cooked properly. Number 7, ham and fresh eggs. Eggs could not survive a trail drive. They broke, they spoiled, they were a comfort left behind in Texas. So a breakfast of fried ham and 2 fresh eggs, the yolks soft and golden and ready to run, was among the first things a cowboy ordered when he hit town with money in his pocket. The Boardinghouse fried the ham until the edges curled, slid the eggs in beside it, and served the whole thing with biscuits to sop the yolk. A man broke those yolks with reverence, watching the gold spill across his plate, and ate slow to make it last. After months without a single egg, that simple breakfast felt like the height of civilized living, and drovers spoke of it for years afterward. Number 6, canned tomatoes. Cowboys had a famous weakness for canned tomatoes. They bought them by the tin on the trail when they could, and prized them above almost anything. In the Cattletown boarding house, stewed tomatoes came warm and cheap, simmered with a little sugar and a torn-up biscuit, sometimes a knob of butter melting on top. The bright acid sweetness cut through the grease and dust of the drive and seemed to quench a thirst that water never could. Old drovers swore the juice revived a man worn down by heat and hard riding better than anything else on the table. They drank the liquor straight from the dish and ate the soft fruit by the spoonful, and a smart landlady kept the cans stacked high. Number 5, oyster stew. Nothing said a cowboy had truly arrived in town like a steaming bowl of oyster stew, the unlikeliest luxury of the dusty plains. The railroads brought canned and barreled oysters far inland, and the better Cattletown eating houses simmered them gently in milk and butter until the bowl turned rich and pale, the oysters plump, a dusting of pepper on top, and crackers crumbled in. To a man fresh off the saddle, hundreds of miles from any sea, that creamy bowl was the very picture of refinement and reward. He spent his money proudly on it, savoring each tender oyster, feeling like a gentleman for an evening. Dodge City and Abilene both boasted eating houses famous for their oysters, and a drover who could afford a bowl felt every inch the king of the cow trail. Number 4, real coffee with sugar and cream. The trail had coffee, bitter, boiled black in a smoke-blackened pot, grounds and all, drunk scalding from a tin cup with nothing to soften it. So the first cup of proper boarding house coffee, poured hot and fresh and served with a bowl of white sugar and a pitcher of real cream, was a small ceremony of homecoming. A cowboy stirred in the sugar, watched the cream cloud the cup until it went pale, and drank it slow, the bitterness gone gentle and rich. It was the same drink that had kept him alive on the drive, transformed into a pleasure. Men lingered over it long after the meal was done, cup after cup, in no hurry to leave the warm room. That sweetened, creamed coffee tasted like the end of the long ride itself. Number 3, pie. This was the one a man would pay a full day's pay for a single slice. Pie was the crown jewel of the Cattletown table, and a cowboy chasing it would walk past a dozen saloons to find a boarding house that baked a good one. Dried apple pie, custard pie, vinegar pie, whatever the cook had, a wedge of flaky crust around a sweet, warm filling was the thing drovers dreamed of through the long, dusty weeks. They ate it slow and serious, savoring every bite, and many a cowboy declared he would ride 100 extra miles for a proper piece of pie. Landladies who could turn out a fine one became legends up and down the trail. Their names passed cook to cook. After a season without sweetness, that single slice was worth nearly any price. Number 2, fried chicken, golden crackling fried crisp in a deep iron skillet of hot lard Fried chicken was the Sunday dinner a cowboy carried in his heart the whole length of the trail. No drive could keep a chicken, so the bird belonged entirely to town and home, and a boarding house platter of it piled high drew men like a beacon. The crust shattered between the teeth, the meat steamed juicy beneath, and beside it sat mashed potatoes, cream gravy, and hot biscuits. Trail hands ate it with their hands, and no apology, working down to the bone, grease to the wrists, grinning all the while. It tasted of mothers and front porches and everything the cow trail had stripped away. Number 1, fried beefsteak with cream gravy. And in first place, the meal a cowboy had been dreaming of since the first day on the trail. A thick beefsteak, pounded tender, dredged in flour, and fried golden in a screaming hot skillet, then smothered in pale peppery cream gravy, and laid beside mashed potatoes and a stack of hot biscuits. It seems impossible that men who ate beef every day would crave it most of all, but that was the cruel joke of the trail. They had the meat and never the cooking. The boarding house gave them beef the way it was meant to be, crusted and juicy, drowned in rich gravy, served on a real plate at a real table. A trail-worn drover would close around that steak like a man saved, eat until he could not move, and call it the finest meal of his life. That one plate of fried steak and cream gravy was the taste of the long ride finally, blessedly over. There they are, the 30 dinners that meant the end of the trail. After 100 dusty days of beans, salt pork, and bitter boiled coffee, these were the meals that made a cowboy feel human again. Which one would you have ridden hardest for? Drop it in the comments, and if you would want to pull up a chair at that boarding house table, hit subscribe.